Well, I never thought the day would come that I'd be releasing robot stamps, as well as a set of 20 new ink colours, a new line with grave expressions, but today's the day. So I'm going to introduce you to 6 new stamps that I'm releasing and 20 new ink colours. So I'm going to start off with the stamps, okay, and we just run through each stamp. Then I'll run through a couple of examples that I've done of the stamps, and then we'll get onto the inks. So we go to the slideshow now. Actually, before the slideshow, it's just important to let you know that the new stamps are now in red rubber. Okay, I prefer red rubber probably over grey rubber. Well, I do prefer over grey rubber, and I've wanted red rubber for ages. I think for those of you that have been stamping an awful long time, probably agree with me that red rubber is probably the best kind of substrate for the rubber substrate for stamping. It's hard to explain, but they're a little bit springer, a little bit more springy, squishy. You get a beautiful stamp with them. Now the stamps in the packaging, so this one here, we'll go into detail on these in a moment. The actual picture on the front of the packaging, the stamp inside is much bigger. Okay, so don't be misled by the picture. You can see the stamp, and these are ideal for A6, A5 cards or whatever you're doing with them. So okay, we'll go to the slideshow now and I'll carry on. Okay, so here's the first stamp in the series of 6. This one's called New Friends. Now, just note that where it says New Friends at the top, and if I'm not looking directly at you, it's because I'm looking at the screen to do the slideshow. It says New Friends at the top. The sentiment would be different to what it says normally at the top, because the sentiments are normally a lot longer, so they don't fit on the packaging so well. So the sentiment says, it's good to make new friends, and you've got your robot here, sitting on a wall, holding his umbrella because it's raining. The little baby robot just sat below him, sheltering under the umbrella, and you'll see a little tiny robot snail that's crawled up the side of the wall there just to kind of say hello. Now, I'm going to show you some examples of these coloured, just basic coloured with the inks, just a watercolour technique. So we'll move on, and here's one that I've coloured in using the inks, just watercolour down inks for this. It's really effective. They look lovely watercoloured. I will show you when we get into the inks. I'll definitely show you lots of different techniques you can use with the inks. For these examples, I'm just showing you the basic watercolour technique. Okay, let's move on to the second stamp. Spread a little kindness, and the sentiment says, spread a little kindness every day. And you have a robot here. He's sat on a park bench. He's brought his bird seed along. There's a little robot bird just perched on the corner there. And I think he's contemplating whether to hop down and take the bird seed. So that's stamp number 2, and I'll just show you the coloured in version here. And there we go. And that's, again, just watered down paint. You'll notice some leaves underneath there, so I've coloured these sort of autumnal, but you could colour them green, summer leaves. Next stamp. This one's called Time Together, and the sentiment is time together is never wasted. And you have the little robot sat on a sharing swing with his robot teddy bear, and he's holding a balloon. I do like to add balloons quite often. And the balloon's more of a kind of steampunky balloon. It's kind of patchwork, if you can see there, and some nuts and bolts scattered on the ground there. And we just move on to the colour version. There we go. I've actually put this one in a little mount, and you probably see I've also added a few birds in the sky. Next stamp. This one's called Better Together. So you have 2 robots here holding hands. They're kind of gazing into each other's eyes. They've got hearts on their chests. On the ground we've got old oil cans, nuts and bolts, and just some scrap metal there on the ground. And this one, all I've done is shaded with a 12B pencil. Okay, a very soft pencil, and you'll see that I've shaded from the outside in. So the light's coming from the center. So you've got this nice shine going down the middle of the robots. And when you stamp, okay, you're stamping with black ink, you've just got black. Stamping with blue ink, you just have blue. So you lose all your shading from the original drawing that I would have done. So this is a nice way to add that shading back in with a pencil and give it more that 3D that the original drawing would have had. And you can add ink over the top of this. So on the next one, you can see I've just put very diluted colour over the pencil shading on this, and it works really, really well. So I'll just go back to the pencil shading one first, and then you'll see as we go back how the colour works. And it doesn't have to be diluted ink, okay? So on this next one, this is full strength ink over the pencil shading, and that works well too. Okay, next stamp. Oh no, it's not next stamp, we've got some bookmarks. So a couple of bookmarks quickly here, pencil shading and grey ink placed over the top of the pencil shading. So I've separated this stamp, so the two robots are on each bookmark. Next stamp. This is called Rainy Day. The sentiment is when life throws you a rainy day, splashing puddles. I'm sure we've all done that as children. I'm sure I still do that as an adult. So you got this cheeky little chappy here jumping in a puddle, and we move on to a very simple watercoloured version of this, clouds in the background. You'll notice in the puddle, you'll see here the reflection of the robot in the puddle. Okay, and all I've done, I've transferred the colours that I've used on the robot into the puddle. So you can just see his feet and the bottom of his body in the reflection there. And I've just added the yellow that I used on his feet and the red on his body to the reflection. It makes it kind of pop out. And finally, we have wash your worries away. The sentiment is wash your worries away with an exclamation mark on the end. And we've got a kind of oversized robot here sitting in a bath. He's a bit big for it, and the water's just splashing over the side, lots of bubbles. He's just chilling. And there's a watercolor version. I've kind of added a little bit of rust and a few rust runs to the bath here. Okay, so that's the 6 stamps, and just a few examples of how you can color it with a watercolor. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed the stamps. Okay, so now we have the colour chart, and I'll run through the colours. 20 colours in total. We're going to start on the first row, okay, and we go from left to right. So top row, first colour, we have turquoise, followed by Tuscan teal. Now, just important to note that on a lot of these colour groups, so like the greens, your earthy, your yellows, and your blues, and your violets and purples, in those groups I've used the same kind of base pigment for those colours in that group, most of the colours in that group, and I'll explain as we go along. So for instance, Tuscan teal and turquoise, you'll find they blend together really, really nice. They really go together. Okay, top column, third colour, this is called Slowberry. And if those of you know Prussian blue, Stober is very similar to Prussian blue as an artist pigment. Fourth one along on the top row, we've got Mediterranean blue, very powerful, bright, deep Mediterranean blue. The fifth, the fifth colour, we have plum pie. So a kind of it's not too dark, more of an aubergine plum pie, but a bit brighter than an aubergine. So down to the second row now, first colour, we've got raspberry ripple. So a violet, a bit like a quinacridone violet. Next colour we have is fuchsia. Think magenta, think hot pink, kind of fuchsia. So again, those three colours, so your plum, your raspberry ripple, your fuchsia, you find they blend quite nicely together. They're all in that same colour group. Okay, third colour on the second row, we have firecracker. This is a deep red, not burgundy, but just a deep fiery red. I love this colour, and if you want to brighten and make a brighter red, you can just add a little bit of the yellow, a little bit of maybe the marigold to it, and you'll brighten that red up. So the fourth colour along is on the second row is buff. So perfect skin tone colour. It's a very weak colour. Okay, I haven't done it too heavy. Sometimes when you're trying to do skin tones, you have to water the ink down so much, or whether it be watercolour or whatever medium you're using. This is kind of good to go out the bottle, a little bit of water with it, and you can build up the shadows of the skin tone. So buff's a great colour. Okay, next, so the fifth colour on the second row is marigold. So we're starting into the kind of the yellow tones now. Marigold, best way to explain it is a bit like an egg yolk yellow. Okay, so third row, first colour, best colour in the whole world. It's called Skinner's Gold. So this one's named after me. And those of you who have followed me will know that I'm a big advocate for probably quinacridone colours anyway, but the gold is one that I've taught with for years and years and years. And if you like your rusts, don't just think of it as rust though, but if you like your rust, it's a great colour for rust. So I've developed this in the ink and just say it's cool. Next colour to the right of it is French mustard. This is in the same lines as a quinacridone gold. So I have many different versions of quinacridone gold, different companies, different paints. This is like a deeper version of the quinacridone gold. Okay, but it's called French mustard. That will blend great with a quinacridone gold. The third one along is called London brick. Okay, London brick is more of a russet, more of a reddy brown. Those four colours, marigold, Skinner's Gold, French mustard, and russet, they will blend beautifully. Okay, they just go. Okay, then we've got fourth colour along, second row, we have coffee bean. Not really a reddy brown, it's more of a bark brown, if that makes sense, more of a bark brown. Fifth colour, third row, we have seaweed, a very dark green. Okay, final row at the bottom. First colour is olive grove. Name says it really, it's an olive, like a mid-olive. Next colour along is golden green. Golden green and olive, again, use the same base pigment for both of these, and they just blend. They blend together really, really nicely. You can use the seaweed for your shadows and your darker tones. Okay, third colour along, bottom row, we have linen. Self-explanatory, it's a linen colour. I use this a lot for age paper, things like that, and I'll show you a few examples that I've used that on in a moment. Fourth colour, bottom row, we have mushroom. I could explain this as maybe a browny grey. Okay, a browny grey. That's the best way to explain it. And the final colour is cold steel. Cold steel is kind of based on a colour called Payne's grey. It's a kind of bluey grey. Okay, and a lot of artists will use Payne's grey rather than black. But this is based on Payne's grey, but it's not quite as blue as a Payne's grey, but it has got a tint. I've put a tint of blue in there. So that's the 20 colours. And now we go on and I'll show you some different techniques that I've played around with the colours and show you some of the things that you can do with these inks. Okay, so before we start this slideshow, I showed you previously the watercolour technique. Okay, there is a video out on this watercolour technique. It should be out now. There'll be a short version on Facebook, but there'll be a full version on my YouTube channel. So on this slideshow, we're just going to be covering really other techniques outside of the watercolour technique that you can do with the inks. So we start with this one. The background of this paper is just literally I've popped some inks down onto a craft mat with a pipette. I think I've used turquoise and golden green on this, and then spritz of water and just dip the card through the inks. I've then stamped on it. Okay, and I've used black archival ink for this. And I've used bleach to bleach out the robots and the balloon, but you can see I've painted the balloon in now. I've also spritzed with the bleach, and I've spritzed quite heavy with the bleach on this. I've used thin bleach. Okay, it's like I say, it's probably an old technique, but I'm using the bleach an awful lot with these stamps. So I've spritzed with the bleach. I've bleached out the actual stamp parts. Okay, and then on this one, I've just literally coloured in where I've bleached out. So once you've bleached out, leave it a few minutes and then you can colour in on top. Okay, so have a look at the next technique. So very similar thing again. I've swiped the tag through drips of the ink and water. I think I've used the fuchsia and possibly the Skinner's Gold or the Marigold with this. And I've bleached out the little robot there, and I've just left him white. I thought he looked quite cool in just white. Similar thing, this is the beach splattering. You can spatter the bleach fine, you can spatter with a paintbrush, a toothbrush. This comes out of a big spray bottle, so the bleach spatters are quite large on this. Just a little note, so I've been using black archival ink, and you can see here I've put 5 dots of archival ink. So we've got the jet black, the Wendy Vichy watering can, coffee, sepia and sienna. And you'll see the bleach will affect other colours of the archival ink. Black it didn't affect. The sienna it did affect slightly. So I would say if you're using this, if you're doing these techniques, stick to black. I haven't tested every single archival ink in the world, or every single ink in the world with bleach, but I can say black archival ink works great. Swipe tags, so these have been swiped through colours. I've spattered with bleach, I've spattered with acrylic paint, I've edged them as well, and then just stamped on the top with black archival ink. I might have actually probably stamped first, because the inks are so transparent you can stamp before you ink. Most of you guys know that anyway, I'm sure. Okay, so this is drip and water splash. So with the pipettes on the bottle, I've literally dripped down the tag. So I've swiped it, I think turquoise first, and I've dripped a few colours. I think there's a little bit of watered down plum pie in here. I might have even dripped a little bit of bleach here and there and spattered with water. So this is dripping wet into wet. So the tag would have been wet, and then I've dripped colour down from the top. So this is wet and wet. What can I tell you? So I think I may have painted it first with cold steel. Could have been coffee bean, cold steel. It's a while back when I did this one. And then I've dripped in with colours like linen, quinacridone gold. I've dripped in a little bit of bleach as well. I've spattered a little bit. And as it's wet and wet, it starts to just disperse, like you can see there, and crawl out. I've also used a little bit of salt here and there. This works fantastic for things like moth wings. I think the next slide, there we go. So I've cut out a moth wing from it. It's a really cool technique, and you'll also see that I've spattered, you can see some white dots on there. For that I've used Dr. Phil Martin's anti-bleed proof white. Okay, the anti-bleed proof white will stop the ink bleeding up through the white paint. All right, next one. Just using some of the rusty colours, so I've dripped down with a pipette with French mustard. Okay, from the top, base with the cold steel grey, and I've dripped in some of the Skinner's Gold as well in there, dripped in a little bit of bleach, just messing around. Stenciling, so it stencils lovely. Two ways that I found work well. For me, I'd like the domed stencil brush. Okay, and I will dip into the ink. I'll take a little bit of the ink out onto a piece of paper towel, and then I'll stencil, and you don't really get bleeding with that. So here I've used, I think I've probably used, yeah, I've used plum pie, and the fuchsia on this. This is using a few of the colours all combined through one of my stencils. You can use your blending tool. I quite like the domed pads for stenciling, a bit like I like the domed stencil brushes best. Same technique, take some of the ink out of the pad, so dip it in the ink, take some out, and then gently pounce down. A little bit of practice, you get it well. I prefer the brush, but everybody to their own. Right, next. This is stamped on top of the stenciling. I've then bleached out the robot, okay, and then painted him in with the fuchsia. So you can get that nice stencil background on the back and still be able to keep the robot nice and plain. Salt dye. So this is rock salt. Okay, and what I've done is I put the rock salt into a little pot similar to this. Okay, dripped the whatever colour you like. Okay, I've used French mustard, I think, on this, or Skinner's Gold. Okay, and there's your salt. Do let it dry. So it might take, leave it for a day and let it dry. Now you can use this and place this onto the ink. So let's go to the next slide. So on your top example here, that's the dyed salt placed into wet ink. Okay, that's cold steel. The salt's been removed now once it's dried. So put it into the dried ink. You've probably seen this technique with watercolours, very similar, where you put the salt into the ink. Let it dry. What it does, as far as I can work out, it draws the ink into the salt, but the ink, the French mustard that I put into the ink is come out of the salt. Okay, so you wipe the salt off after it's dried and it leaves these dots. The bottom picture, that's some age paper that I did. Obviously I painted the linen on there. I think a little bit of the coffee bean spritz on as well, but can you see the little tiny rust spots? Once the paper's been dried and I've inked it, let it dry. Obviously I've scrumpled it as well. You place your salt where you want it, and then just very, very lightly spritz. I don't know where my spritzer is. There it is. There we go. I'm using one of the fine misters. You don't want a lot, just a little tiny spritz of water over the salt, just to dampen it. And what will happen, don't touch it then, just let it do its thing. And the French mustard, whatever colour you're doing, it doesn't have to be French mustard, whatever colour, it will just start to seep out. Just leave it alone, let it dry. Once it's dried, knock off the salt, and you'll be left with these little tiny rust spots. Okay, takes a little bit of practice. If you do too much water, a lot of the ink just seeps out. Once you get it right, it's a really nice little technique, and I think you'll see it here on the age paper, especially the one to the right especially, but you'll see little tiny dots where the rust has done its thing. The one on the left, it seeped out a bit more. The one on the right seeped out less. It depends how much water you put on it. And next up is a tag that I've used it on. So you'll see on this tag, you should see just the little tiny dots on there where I've used the salt. I've obviously crumpled this up and used a blending tool on the peaks of the creases of the paper to bring out the texture of the creases. So that's salt rust, I've called it, but it can be whatever colour you like. And that's the salt with no ink in the salt, just pure salt on top of the Raspberry Ripple, I think. So you can get some quite cool effects of the salt. This looks complicated, but it really isn't. This is wet ink. I think I've used olive green and maybe marigold. But anyway, I've put the ink in really wet on top of it. I think I swiped it, but it could just be painted on. Just lots and lots of water, lots of ink and lots of water. And then just with a pipette, I use these little tiny pipettes. I've just pipetted some bleach into it, thin bleach, and let it do its thing and let it crawl. It takes a little bit of practice. If you put too much bleach in there, after 5 minutes, the bleach would have dispersed too much. But you can get these kind of effects. I've used full strength colour on this, so you can't really stamp over this, but if you use watered down colour, you definitely could. And this is the same technique, but I've double dripped. So I've dripped the ink in once, left it 5-10 minutes, and then dripped into the centre of it again to get back to the white of the card that I was using. I had a little experiment with Creative Expressions crackle glaze over the top of the ink. It works absolutely fine. Doesn't really matter if you shift the ink with the crackle glaze, okay, because obviously I put white chalk paint, the Cosmic Shimmer chalk paint on the top of this. But I have actually, with these inks, if you leave them, don't just dry them with a heat tool if you're going to put something over the top of it. Leave it for a good day or so, and I've actually varnished on top of these inks. If you're quick enough with a brush, you can do it. But I won't guarantee if you have it heavy-handed, but you can do it. You can also use a spray varnish. I use a Rust-Oleum matte varnish, and it doesn't react with the inks whatsoever. If you wanted to make something waterproof, I think you can get other things to make these inks waterproof as well. Okay, next. Mister, they mist beautifully. Honestly, they do. I've got one here. Just these little glass misters. I water the ink down 50-50, but it's up to you how much water you put with it, to be honest. But yeah, they mist perfectly, and I've not had one block yet. Touch wood. Touch my desktop. I've not had one block yet. And you get some really cool rust effects. It doesn't have to be rust. I know I keep going on about rust, but you can do it with your pinks, your purples, whatever colour. So next, here's a rust effect that I've done, and this is just spritzing those quinacridone gold colours with the cold steel, probably a bit of the coffee bean as well. Just going wet into wet into wet, wet into dry. Just play with those colours, and you get this kind of rusty old plate kind of look, and you get a different result every time. It's really fun. The same thing again, really, with those same colours, spritzing them. I normally put a base colour down first. Quite often cold steel or coffee bean. I've also put some of the rust in this. You'll see, sorry, not some of the rust, some of the salt, the ink salt. So if you see the little dots in there, that's where I put the salt on afterwards. Okay. So that's a salt over. Writing with a dip pen. So I use the glass dip pen. I've got one here. Yeah, there we go. Okay, I use this one. The ink goes on and on and on and on. You can use one of the metal dip pens. You should have one here. Here we go. If the camera focuses. Yeah, you can use one of these as well, but not as good as the glass one for me. I will have videos on these. I've got a video on using the dip pen as well coming out. Just go on, they're great. And what I do is I normally put my ink into a little pot similar to this for the dip pen. I water it down a little bit. You could use gum arabica as well and put a little dot of gum arabica into the ink and it will flow even better. But to be honest, even without that, it just flows and flows and flows. What you see here, what I've scribbled on here, yeah, it would have gone more than what I did. So really, really good with a dip pen, especially if you're doing things like Zentangle and, doodling or sketching. Really, really good. This is just showing you blending of the colours, okay, and how they blend. There is a spelling mistake in here. I'm really sorry. Bottom one says dark olive, but it's not. It's seaweed. So there we go. And back to the colour chart. So that's just some of the things that you can do. You guys out there that have been playing around with inks an awful long time, I'm sure you'll come up with all sorts of wonderful and weird things that we can do with the inks. So that's a brief run through of the inks for you. So thanks very much for watching. And yeah, I'll see you on some videos very soon. Okay, bye.